Well, let me introduce you to our guest. This is Dr. Sherona Rawat. Dr. Rawat, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Radio Islam International.
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah for having me on the show.
Well, I think we both agreed when I chatted to you that it's important, to understand our mental reaction, or how we, subconsciously would react to something like this, and how it impacts from a mental point of view on our lives, and also on our physical health, because your mental health affects your physical side as well. So I'm sure you've heard. I'm sure you've heard my introduction. What would your input be with regards to that?
I think, there is a lot of anxiety and panic, and I think that's because there's a lot of unfiltered information that's actually been out there, on social media and being passed along, on WhatsApp messages and that kind of thing. So I think, the important thing is when it comes to situations like this, that the average person out there be given specific information that's simply put together, that just spells out the details of what they need to do and how they can best actually survive the situation. I think it's important for people to know that while, some of the kind of, the projections are that it could take some time to resolve, the main issue with this virus is that it is extremely contagious. And I think that's the issue that everybody is panicking about. But what they need to look at is that there are other coronaviruses that have been around, and people have survived those, and this too we shall survive. It's just how we manage it and what we do about it, and within our communities and within our country, how it's handled that's important. And this is why they are recommending the social isolation, and washing your hands. And basically the washing your hands thing is basically washing your hands with soap and water. It's only in medical facilities and things that you might need the stronger hand sanitizers, which we already have in hospitals, outside wards and things like that. So the average person needs just soap and water, and that's basically all that you need. And you need to understand that we need to keep contact to a minimal, because it is a highly contagious condition. And that is why we need people to actually, kind of limit their exposure to going out, stay home more, spend more time with just a few people at home, basically, to kind of contain the spread of the illness. And that's the main aim of this, is containing the spread. It's not that it cannot be treated or that people cannot survive this. Most of the people who become infected do survive this. And slowly the world will build up some kind of immunity towards it as the illness progresses. So it's just about having a huge influx early on in the pandemic, and very soon into the illness, when we are still trying to understand the illness and still trying to develop vaccines and other kinds of treatment options. So it's about that the isolation and the washing the hands and things is about. It's about slowing it down. So those that do need intensive medical treatment, those that do have complications, and those that do actually develop the more serious version and actually develop such things as pneumonia and other things like that, actually have facilities that they can go to, so that our hospitals are not overloaded, and so that these people can actually get into the ICUs and can actually be put onto the machines and that kind of thing. That's what we are trying to do. We're trying to slow the pandemic down. So I think people need to look at it in that way. That yes, it's not your typical flu, but it is along the lines of that. It's much more contagious than the average flu, but it's still something that the human race will overcome, and we'll move forward from this. But it does entail a change in lifestyle at this time, and I think that is what also causes a lot of panic for people. Yes. People don't like change, and they don't like to adjust to new things, and this is actually forcing us to re-look at our lives, which actually is a positive thing, to look at our work and our businesses and our homes laterally, to look at our relationships with our family, with our children, the people around us. Some people will not want to be cooped up with some of their family members. So, looking at kind of developing relationships and actually stressing on the things we actually ignore on a daily basis, or a lot of people avoid by actually spending time out of their homes rather than at home. So it is calling for a change, and it is calling for us to actively re-look at our lives, which is not a bad thing. So I think we need to look at it in that way. And I think it's going to help us redefine our lives. I think it's also with the financial issue coming in and the economic strain that it's going to bring along and the job situations and things, which as I said, I believe these things are not going to be right for the next 2 years and 18 months in the way people are expecting. It's going to be for a few weeks, maybe, along those lines, where we actually just curb the epidemic a bit. So it's for this period of time we are looking at. But in this period of time, it will also help a lot of us redefine our businesses and our practices, look at lateral ways, look at our businesses in lateral ways, look at different ways of managing our businesses and bringing in income. It may be increasing the quality of life, because in actual fact, you are expected to actually slow down, take some time out, pull into your family and actually move away from the external distractions that are out there in the world. So it can have a positive impact on us as well. It's all about balance. It's about working out what is the essential information. And it's basically about just following the instructions that have been put out there. So when we say isolate, keep kind of not have large gatherings. If you have symptoms, call in the hotline, have tests done should you need a test done. And if you are positive, then you isolate yourself for that time until you recover. And people do recover. So it's about those kinds of things. The best that we are looking at is more along the lines of people that have already got some kind of respiratory illness or who have other conditions that can add to the situation, and also much older people. But that doesn't mean every old individual that gets this illness is going to pass away from it. So it's not necessary to become that anxious and fall into that kind of a panic mode. If we just follow the simple instructions, I think things will pan out and we should be fine in the end.
All right. One of the things that I was worried about is that young children are now at home, and many parents are not able to, or are finding it difficult to explain to them what has happened. Because for them, sometimes parents don't have the knowledge themselves or haven't really heard everything. And with all the fake news and all the messages that are going through that aren't always, they're just half-truths. And this scares people. And when you're trying to explain to a child, what's the best way to get that message across to them?
I think, it's important, as I said, for you to have an understanding first, and for you to be able to understand it to the point where you can simplify it. They do not need detailed explanation. After all, most children would be quite happy to be home and not at school, from my understanding. So, I think, I don't think staying at home is going to be really an issue. I think probably what they'd be wondering is why the change. And so the detailed explanations are unnecessary. A simple explanation that there is some kind of a flu that's out there that it can be quite dangerous to certain people. So everybody's just needing to stay home at this time and, not to mix too much. So we need you to play at home, use your toys, use your iPad or your, computer games, or do some kind of schoolwork or drawings or whatever it is. But we need to do some stuff at home, which is a little bit different from what we might be used to. But again, actually, it's going to really, really help with our children and development, because playing outside in our gardens and spending time with family is actually extremely healthy, and helps develop bonds between family members and between parents and child. So in actual fact, having to have your children at home and having to actually function with them and work with them and kind of interact with them is actually going to increase our exposure to each other. It's going to help us build relationships. So I think there's also a positive aspect to that as well. So you're going to explain it in an age-appropriate manner. You're going to keep it simple, and you're going to explain why. Because a lot of times people will just say what it is that they need to do and not saying why. And I think a lot of times certain children, especially the higher functioning children, want to know a little bit about why. And I think when you explain the why as well, also keep that as simple as possible, but just get the answer across to them. And at some point, it becomes that, I've told you what needs to be done. I've told you why it needs to be done. You understand what has to be done and why. Yeah. And so basically, this is what I need you to comply with. And it's important that you comply with it, because it can be dangerous to you and to the rest of us. And that's simple enough, I think. because you are the parent after all, and so you're also setting the rules and things at home. So it's just another rule that you're setting. And even if you had to set any other guideline or any other rule with your children, parenting your children, bringing them up, there's a similar way that you would be handling it anyway. So I don't see any difference in relation to that. And children are quite happy as long as they've got enough information, and they're willing to continue with their lives and follow through on instructions and things. The most important thing for children is that they want to feel safe. And they feel safe when their adults are strong enough to know what to do and how to do it. And they feel confident in the fact that their adults in their lives are able to take care of them and keep them safe.
That's, I think, a very important thing. So, instead of us showing fear and concern and becoming overly anxious to in front of our children, it's rather to become informed and be more able to answer their questions, and at the same time being responsible so that they can see that we are handling a situation rather than us panicking and making them feel the same way.
Absolutely correct.
Well, what about the fact now, when this happened in China, and we know that in China and even South Korea and the virus is actually flatlining at the moment. They haven't really had, many internal cases. Most of the cases that they have recently have been from people coming into the country. And this is also for the simple fact that they've had a good health system that managed to actually work, productively and efficiently to be able to handle the virus. But what happened was they found that when they brought about the social distancing or the isolation, that the issue of relationships in families, especially being close all the time, was starting to be a problem, and domestic abuse rose. How do we combat that in our families? People's, obviously, sometimes we have our closeness to each other. They say familiarity breeds contempt. What do we do in cases like that? How do we handle that?
I think, when you're looking at pre-existing relational problems and family dysfunction, when you put somebody then in a small space, it's almost like isolating them, within a cage. And it does tend to kind of become worse. So, there's no easy answer to that. People have to actually deal with those issues and actually have to decide how to manage it and which way to go. For example, if there's a dysfunctional family and a child is unhappy and cannot manage in that situation, their child might want to stay with a grandparent or something for this time so that they can actually, have a better experience while they've been isolated. So I'm thinking that maybe in families like that, people have to come to some kind of individual solution that suits that family. And should they need help with that, then they need to get help from the relative professionals that would be able to help them with that, such as social workers and things like that. In smaller spaces and smaller homes and things, also people might tend to step on, one another's toes. And again, I suppose if you live in a house and you've got a garden and things like that, it's a little bit easier because the children can play outside. They found with a lot of viruses and things, and even in the past, that fresh air from outside and sunlight actually helps a lot. And also with this illness in particular, heat tends to kill it. So, being out in the sun and, the weather that we have, the hot weather we have often helps with that. And even they said things like, steaming up the shower, and taking in the steam and things like that help. But that's just a sideline thing. Basically, I think that what people need to do is look at the space they have, look at how they're living, and see how they can manage the situation as best as they can. So if somebody has a room that's their own space, then they need to just be able to manage themselves within that room. If that individual shares a room with a sibling, then they've got half the room, this is your side and this is your side. So I think parents also would need to step in and say, there's your part and there's your part, stay within your respective areas. Things
or have
like
timetables.
Sorry?
And have timetables. So maybe, you can have the room for 2 hours, and then I'll go into the living space, and then when your 2 hours are up, it's my turn, that kind of thing.
Yes, perfect. To actually work out some kind of individual solution to the situation. So I think it would take somebody who leads that. So it would be a parent. So even if it's a grown-up child that actually brings them to this, can we do it this way? So I think the family would need to sit down and decide as to how they're going to manage the situation. There's, I think, especially a concern in much more smaller homes and dwellings and flats and things like that, because with apartments and flats and stuff like that, again, we can't have the children going out, because then they're going to be mixing with other people, and then the isolation thing goes down the drain. So they're ending up having to stay in a small space. And I think that's where the problem comes in as well. Yes. So the families, looking at their own situations, would need to bring solutions together for themselves and try and work it out. And I mean, you know, in like New York and you know, London and places like that where people have like pets that they have to take out for the walk. I know this is a strange analogy, but, you know, like sometimes maybe just getting the kids together and just taking a drive out, you know, into the country and just to letting them play out, you know, in the park or something like that, where there's space and there's air, and there's fresh air and there's ventilation and there's sunlight, and there other people are far away, so the children have a chance to run around and exercise and do whatever, and then just, you know, get them back and take them back home. So those are things that people might consider, especially those that, as I said, live on small properties or live in flats or in apartments. And then it's activities that you'd actually look at, you know, and you should know your child well enough to know what your child likes to do. So some children like drawing and writing, some people don't. Some children like to listen to music or lectures or whatever, and some people don't. So, you know, we need to look at what is it that our child likes and encourage them to go towards the activities that they enjoy. So we're actually bringing enjoyable activities into their lives, because this also is a way of people getting a lot of free time. If you look at a lot of the children now that are going to be home, it's actually free time, and it's free time to develop themselves, develop their activities, spend time and learning about themselves and who they are and their relationships within their families and that kind of thing. Actually gives us an opportunity to do those kinds of things that normal life doesn't allow us the time to do. So I think there is also a silver lining when you look at those kinds of things, because that gets neglected often in life, and later in life when people are old and gray and the children are big and they regret, you know, we didn't do this and we didn't do that. So there's maybe a tiny section of time actually, you know, compared to the rest of a person's life, but it might be a means of bringing in some better habits and better coping mechanisms and better relationships within the families.
Inshallah. Well, one last question, and that is, what about long-term isolation? What happens if we become housebound, you know, due to the outbreak becoming widespread?
I think that, you know, with the being housebound, I think at the moment generally people are supposed to be kind of housebound, you know. So basically you are actually doing just your essentials, and other than that you're supposed to be kind of staying home and not intermixing. And this is why the president brought things up, like, you know, not having gatherings over 100 and things like that. But I mean, even 100 people is too many. I mean, some places with isolation, they say not more than 5 people. So obviously the people you are with at the moment, you continue to be with, but it's about not going and exposing yourself to new individuals and people that may have traveled out and people that have mixed with other people who have traveled out and that kind of thing. So I would say that we already are in that housebound mode at the moment, and we should be in that for a while. So with the schools closed, it's one of the reasons the schools are closed, is so that people actually stay within their own homes most of the time, and that they don't socialize generally out there in the world. And that's why the children are actually at home. It's because of that. So if people are going out and they're socializing, they're having family functions and they're having people over and they're going out to the malls with everybody and they're taking the kids out and they're not being careful with the washing of the hands and things like that, then they're automatically spreading the virus and they're automatically increasing what they call that curve on the graph, you know, And what happens is that
the curve is not going to be making a curve, it's going to carry on spiking, so
it's going to spike,
we're going to have much more people, Yes,
and so it defeats the purpose of what this is about. So we want to keep this short. So we want to keep this short. We need to follow the instructions, and that's why I said right at the beginning that it needs to be simple, straight instructions, you know, that are not ambiguous. So we close the schools, you self-isolate. I think everybody should be generally self-isolating at the moment. I think that should be just a basic plan. That's the whole point, again, as I said, of the children coming home. And then in relation to work as well, those that can work from home, to try and arrange that. Those that have businesses and things like that that need some kind of social interchange maybe need to look at some other options as well, or maybe look at protective mechanisms. For example, we still need to go into the hospitals to see our patients. So we take special precautions. But in actual fact, the hospital should actually not be allowing visitors at all into the
I think
hospital.
most hospitals are actually stopping the visiting hours, or they've made special sort of arrangements for visiting hours, only one person, and at certain times they've made quite a few limitations. I've seen some of the, so Dr. Sherona Rawat, unfortunately we've come to the end of the slot for this evening, and I'm really grateful having spoken to you. It puts lots of people's minds at rest with the questions that may come up, and I'm sure there's many, many more, but this basically covers, I think, the larger questions that come to mind for many people.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. It was nice to be here.
It's a pleasure. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam.